Well, it's great to have all of you with us today. My name is Chris, one of the pastors here, and just a warm shout out to everyone connecting online and across all of our locations. And we're in this third part of this series, Be Life Unleashed. And I think definitely by next week, the title of the series will become extremely clear. For some of you, maybe you're overachievers and you already know where we're going with the title of this series, which is awesome, by the way. But by next week, I think it'll be much clear to everyone. Well, we have this mantra here at Tri-County Church, and this mantra that we say over and over again, it goes like this, that we are to love like Jesus loved, live like he lived, lead like he led, and leave behind what he left behind, which is more people who love, live, and lead like Jesus loved, lived, and led. And what we desire for these statements, this mantra, is we just don't want a gimmicky, catchy phrase. We want this to actually permeate, just to drive us into action in all areas of our life. And so we started asking this question, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to love like Jesus loved? What does it mean to live like he lived? What does it mean to lead like Jesus led? And what does it mean to leave behind what he left behind? I mean, what does that mean? And so what we've been doing purposely is trying to remove the question marks from these statements on what does it mean. And so part one, we removed the question mark and we just said to love first. It was Jesus' words, a new command, an innovative command, a new perspective. To love everyone as I have loved you, so you must love everyone. So we just simply say, let's just be a church, a gathering of people that love first. Then we said we're to live differently. And how we live out our life looks different when Jesus becomes the subject of our life. Now, if you missed part one or part two, or maybe this is your first time just kind of connecting with us here at Tri-County Church, I just want to encourage you, go back and make sure you watch part one and part two. And you can always watch our current series or previous series right here at tcconline.tv. This is also the place you go to connect into our online campus. And we have people around the world, around in different states, every week and connecting with us right now, connecting online. So you get there with tcconline.tv. Also, every message that we give, every series we give, we have discussion guides that we develop that go with the message. And these are great tools for you personally. They're great tools. We have life groups that are using these all the time. But also just want to encourage you, maybe you just grab a group of people and you just discuss kind of what you heard, what you experienced that weekend. And so you can get the discussion guides right here at tcconline.info. Also, .info is a great place to find out a whole bunch of stuff that's going on in the life of the church. And it's this easy, okay? So maybe you're like going, okay, I'm trying to remember these websites. What are they? It's this easy. If you want to watch, go to .tv. If you want information, you go to, you guys are nailed it. I know none of you are expecting coming to church to have a test, a pop quiz, but you just got an A, right? If you want to watch, tcconline.tv. If you want any information, tcconline.info. Now, last week I ended part two, and I made it clear that part one and part two, love first and live differently, we're all going to help us remove those two collectively, to remove the question mark for what does it mean to lead like Jesus led. Now, so many times people want to separate out one or the other. We like to love one, we're not sure about the live differently, but these two are intrinsically tied together. And this is so important that I want to take a moment to come back and look at both of these two, love first and live differently, because again, these two together are going to help remove the question mark to what does it mean to lead like Jesus led. Now, if you were here for part one and part two, I just want you to know, don't tune me out. This is not a recap. This is not just going over the same information that I shared during those first two parts, okay? This is going to be some new insights wrapped around. Now, if you miss one or both of those weeks, that's okay too. You're not going to get lost. Now, still go back and watch part one, part two, because it's going to help give a better framework around what I'm going to share. But we have to understand how these two are intrinsically tied for us to remove the question mark for what does it mean to lead like Jesus led. Ready? Here we go. All of us, no matter what you believe or what you don't believe, all of us, our lives orbits or revolves around someone and something. All of us, right? We orbit around, we revolve around someone, something. And then the someone is who you love, and the something is the what. It's how you live your life, what you do with the life that you have. And left to our own devices, left to our own human nature, all of us, and this isn't going to feel warm and fuzzy, by the way. I'm just letting you know this is not the warm and fuzzy moment. All of us, left to ourselves, we orbit around us. Me, you. This is just true. Again, not warm and fuzzy. Some of you are like, I just need to come to church and get encouraged today. And Chris, that feels horrible. It will get better, I promise. But we just have to recognize the fact that we all, if left to our own decision making, we will orbit around ourselves in every decision we make. If you're married, you know this is true. If you've been married, you know this is true. If you're thinking about not being married, this is true, because what happens, and I'm just speaking from experience, 99.99999%, and let's just round up, of all the arguments that happen in my marriage, well, I'm on camera, or my fault. See what I did there? I'm smart, right? But I'm just talking for me, right? All our arguments in our marriage, I'm just telling you, and I'm just focusing on me right now, because I'm me-centric. The arguments that blow up, I mean, when I think about those moments, it's about, I was really selfish in that moment. I was tired. I didn't want to do something. I didn't think I needed to do something. I didn't respond like I should have responded. I didn't go the extra mile to help in a situation. Like, when I think about all the arguments in our marriage, when I just suss it down, I'm just telling you what I own, right? What I own as an individual, right? I can point fingers all day long, but that never solves anything. It's all about me being me-centric. My wants, my desires, my habits. It's all about me, me, me. And if you would just take a moment and think about the messes in your life. I'm not saying other people aren't part of the cause. I'm just talking about what you can own. You know it's true. You know it's true. And here's the thing. Here's how we can get off the hook. Not really, but it will feel good for a moment. It's not your fault. It's not my fault. You go all the way back to Adam and Eve in the garden. God created this world perfectly. And all of a sudden one day, Eve's listening to the serpent. And the serpent's whispering in her ear, hey, Eve, if you eat from this one tree, this one piece of fruit, you can become like God. Hey, Eve, you can not orbit around God. You can orbit around yourself. You can be like God. And Eve is like, that sounds genius. Goes to Adam. Say, hey, Adam, guess what? We eat this one piece of fruit. I know it's this one tree that God says, don't eat from. Everything else you can. It's fair game, but this one tree not. I understand God says that, but man, the serpent, he's like, he's kind of convincing. He's like, oh, we can become like God. We can orbit around ourselves. And guess what they did? And sin entered this world and fractured this world, and we have been paying for it ever since. And what we know within ourselves, we know we're sinful, broken, fractured people, don't we? We just know that. What is it right now? And I'm not going to look for a show of hands. I'm not going to ask you to stand up and confess. What is it right now that you're desperately trying to break? What is that habit that you're trying to stop and you can't? You have one right now. At least one. Right now. All of us do. That thing that you're like, okay, tomorrow's a new day. Tomorrow's going to wake up, and I'm not going to say that again. I'm not going to think that again. I'm not going to do that again. Tomorrow is a day where I'm going to stop. And then tomorrow comes. You're like, oh my God. How? Like, I didn't want to, but I did. I tried to, but I couldn't. My desire was. I had a friend post on Facebook this week. Long time friend. Yeah, I mean, he had so much impact into my spiritual journey, huge impact on my spiritual journey. And he posted online, he wrote this long Facebook post, and he started off by saying, many of you who are close to me have known this for way too long, but I wanted to take a moment to share with everyone. And as he's writing out this journey, he says, I am an alcoholic. I have a disease. And right now, I'm 175 days sober. And I wanted to scream from the top of my lungs. Because I didn't know. I knew there's something there. I didn't know what that something was. And I was like, thank you for being brave. Thank you for being bold. Thank you for sharing. I mean, 175 days sober. But then I thought about how many years has the disease laid capture to yourself? How many years have you been trying to hide it? How many years have you been trying to overcome it? How many years have you been trying to wake up in the morning and say, not today, I'm not going to drink today. I wonder how many years, right? Within all of us, right? All of us, like we're broken, fractured people. Paul writes that all of us are sinners, that we all sin and fall short of the glory of God. All of us do. That's why left to our own devices, left to our own, right, nature, we just revolve around ourselves. That's our broken humanity. We are me-centric individuals. We just talk. But God did something. When sin entered this world, when Adam and Eve said, yeah, we want our lives to orbit around ourselves. We want to be like God. God set into motion a plan because God's desires for all people to be with him. And God knew that he, as a perfect, holy, loving God, needed a bridge to bring us fractured, imperfect people back to him. So he set in motion this plan. This plan was Jesus. And Jesus said in John chapter 6 that God the Father is drawing all people to him through Jesus. So Jesus is a bridge for us to have a relationship with God the Father. And God the Father is drawing all people. And for some of you, you know what that feels like. You know that tug. You know that drawing. You know that pulling. For some of you, I mean, it's why you're connected with us right now. And you still have your questions and you have your uncertainties and you have your doubts and you just don't know. But there's something within you pulling you, drawing you, tugging at you. It's this feeling at the soul level that it's hard to explain, but you know when it's there. For some of you, you named Jesus the subject of your life. Why? Because of that pulling, that drawing, that tugging. And you just like came to that point, you're like, okay, Jesus, you are. And God is drawing all people to him. Why? Because he loves everyone. And God the Father desires to have all people to have a relationship with him. Why? Because he is love. And when you name Jesus a subject of your life, and Paul wrote to the church in Rome this very succinct thing. We use this word saved or salvation. Paul wrote, if you declare with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Right? To name Jesus the subject of your life isn't this massive list of do's and don'ts. It's faith, it's trust, it's naming Jesus as Lord. It's trusting, believing that God raised God the Son, Jesus, from the grave. And when you name Jesus the subject of your life, something amazing happens. Your life orbits around Jesus. It goes from God the Father drawing you, tugging you, pulling at you, to now your life orbits around him. But this is what happens, and maybe this is where you find yourself. And this is so common and so tragic all at once. What happens so many times is people have that moment. And maybe you know when that moment was. I mean, you remember that moment at that church service with that person saying that message. Maybe you're at a Billy Graham crusade. You remember that moment, the chair you're sitting in and where the sun was. It was that moment where you named Jesus as the subject of your life. Maybe it was in the basement of your house as you're just crying out to God in pain. And in that moment, maybe you don't remember that moment. I mean, just from a small child. I mean, you just, all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, I believe in Jesus. But what happens with so many people, they come to that point where they name Jesus as the subject of their life. They check that box. They're like, yay, I get the t-shirt. I'm now a Jesus follower. But their life never changes. And all of a sudden, Jesus just kind of goes to the background and their life continues to orbit around themselves. And this happens all the time. When I talk with people, I'm like, well, tell me about your spiritual journey. And they're like, oh yeah, I love God and Jesus and stuff. I'm like, what do you mean? I mean, that's great, by the way, but did you relegate Jesus down on the cross? Yeah, I love God and Jesus and stuff. You know, I go to church when I can, and it's all good. It's all good. And maybe this is your story. You check the box. You get heaven. You're like, yeah, get heaven, because the alternative is not that good. You got the t-shirt that says, I'm a Jesus follower, but you just went back to life, living your life, orbiting, revolving around you, and Jesus is now in the background. But Jesus said, no. When you name Jesus as the subject of your life, you live your life differently. Why? Because your old self goes away. Your new self is here, and your new self orbits around Jesus. Now your entire world is around Jesus. And now this is critical. Jesus never expected perfection here. What he expects is your pursuit. Chris Trethewey, me, I continue to want to shove me into this box. That's my sinful, broken, fractured, flawed self. I'm just telling you. But my pursuit is to keep Jesus right at the center, and my life orbits around Jesus. And every time I see me get shoved in there, I try to shove me out and put Jesus in there. I'm just telling you. So when someone hurts me and I want to retaliate, I want to get back at them, I want to fire off a text message that just fillets them emotionally, when I want to do that, my pursuit, not perfection, my pursuit is to keep Jesus right at the center and say, okay, how do I love them? That's living differently. In John chapter 1, John, who walked with Jesus, heard Jesus speak, saw the miracle. John is writing years later back on Jesus' life, and he gives such a powerful description about Jesus. And kind of right in the middle of that chapter, he uses these two words, that Jesus came full of grace and truth. Grace is love, that God loved you first. That with all your brokenness and all your sin, grace covers that. Truth is that God has called you. When you name Jesus the subject of your life, God calls you to live differently. For you to live differently. Not just to check the box, get the t-shirt and say, yay, I get to go to heaven. But now your entire life is different. Why? Because now your life is orbiting around Jesus. And those two, love first and live differently, are tied together. You can't separate them. And when you realize these two are intrinsically tied together, now we get to what does it mean to lead like Jesus led. And love first and live differently. Collectively, we'll remove that question mark. Now, before we get into this very specific moment that Jesus is going to share some of his final words here on this earth, the setup to it is so important. So Jesus had been arrested. He had been put on trial. He'd been flogged. He'd been crucified. He'd been shoved into a tomb. And the disciples, now the 11, there was 12, but Judas betrayed Jesus, and he's now gone. So the 11 were in hiding. But there wasn't just 11 disciples. There was many, many other people that were followers of Jesus at that point. And they were all in hiding. They were scared. They didn't know what to do next. They'd given up their whole life to follow Jesus. Now Jesus is shoved into a tomb. They didn't know what to do. And then all of a sudden, Jesus is alive. I mean, think about that moment. I mean, one moment you're like, we just gave up everything to follow a guy that was killed, and now what? And now they see him alive. And so one day, Jesus tells his disciples, hey, go to this mountain. And Matthew, one of the disciples, is recording this moment that he lived through, he experienced. And Matthew wrote these words. He says, then the 11 disciples, remember Judas is now gone, went to Galilee to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. And when they saw him, they worshiped him. And for you, like, wouldn't that be the case? Even for those of you that haven't named Jesus as a subject yet, you're just on your spiritual journey, you still have questions, you're not sure about this Jesus thing, I mean, you just have questions. I'm just saying, if you were there, you saw someone get crucified, put into a tomb, then you saw that person alive. I'm just telling you, right? And for some of you, you're like, yeah. I would name Jesus as a subject right now if I experienced that. If I saw that with my eyes, I'd be all in. I'd be all in. It would erase all my question marks. And Matthew just said, hey, when they saw him, they worshiped him. Like, that's logical, right? And then Matthew goes, but. And the insight he gives us, I think, is going to be such a huge encouragement. If not to all of you, the vast majority of you. But we'll get to that in a moment. So Jesus gathers everyone together, right? And you could just sense this moment. I mean, Jesus is alive. And Jesus starts to talk, and he goes, all. Now, this word all is an important word. There's going to be 4 all statements throughout what Jesus is going to say. Again, these are some of his last words here on this earth. And the Greek word for all is translated all, right? It's all encompassing. It's holistic. It's complete. But these all statements, again, let's just not fly over them and fly past them. And so the first all statement, Jesus says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Now, here's what we know. When Jesus, God the Son, came to become man, he was fully God and fully man. And right when I say those thoughts, Jesus was fully God and fully man, there's a list of questions that at least erupt within my head. I mean, I got questions around what that even means and how that looks and how that operates. How could Jesus be fully man and fully God? And my list of questions, one day I will ask God my list of questions. So if you're going, yeah, Chris, what does that mean? Welcome, add to my question list. That's great. But what we know is when Jesus came on this earth, fully God, fully man. But there were some limitations around him as God while he was man. But then when God raised him from the dead, like, it shifted, it changed. And now Jesus is talking to this group of people, and he's like, all authority. It's different. Again, I struggle even to hesitate what all those differences was. But what we knew was before that, I mean, he was fully God, fully man, but it looked a certain way. But now that God raised him from the dead, Jesus is standing there, and I just have to think that his voice, the cadence, the sound of his words was just different than any of the disciples have ever heard before. Like, now they're looking at Jesus going, like, he kind of looks the same. I mean, except for the holes in his hands and his feet. I mean, that's a little awkward, but something about it was different. And Jesus said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And you can just feel everyone leaning in. And then Jesus says, therefore, go. I mean, up to this moment, again, they were all there was like a healthy amount of fear. There was uncertainty. There was unknown. I mean, again, one moment they were all following Jesus, and they did not expect any of these events to happen. None of it to happen. And now he's alive, and they had been hiding. They were hunkered down. They weren't sure to go back to their old lives. They weren't sure what to do. And Jesus is like, no. You have to understand, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go. You got to move into action. And he tells them the one action, what they're supposed to go and do. Now, if you are a Jesus follower, if you've named Jesus the subject of your life, Jesus is looking at you, saying these words to you. He says, go and make disciples. Now, if you've been around the church context for any length of time, this word disciples has been hijacked by this other word, discipleship. And track with me on this, because I want to be I'm going to try to be as clear as I can. And so many times this word discipleship has been relegated to this idea, this image of people sitting around a table, Bible open, doing Bible study. Now hear this, and I want to be clear with this. I am all for studying the Bible. I believe in it. I spend 30, 48 hours a week studying the Bible. The Bible is winning to me. Like, I love the Bible. But this word disciple has been hijacked by discipleship, which has been hijacked by this idea that once you become a Christ follower, all you do is sit around and studying Bible. And here's the thing. Your pursuit is Jesus, not knowledge. And those are two completely different pursuits. If you've ever said or ever heard a Christ follower say, which I'm pretty sure if you're a Christ follower, you fall in one of those two categories. If you've ever heard someone say, well, I just need to grow deeper. That's a pursuit of knowledge. Jesus didn't die for you to get deeper. And if you're going, oh, Chris, I disagree with you. Read Paul's letter to the Ephesians, to the church in Ephesus. You know what Paul was railing against? This group of people called the Gnostics. You know who the Gnostics were? They were people who were pursuing gnosis. You know what the Greek word gnosis is? Knowledge. And you know what Paul was saying? No, it's not about the pursuit of knowledge. It's the pursuit of Jesus. If you want to grow deeper, pursue what did Jesus love? How do you love like Jesus? How do you live like Jesus? How do you lead like Jesus? Pursue Jesus, not knowledge. Those are two different pursuits. And oh, by the way, as you pursue who Jesus is, you will know more about Jesus. But knowledge isn't the end pursuit. It's living your life in reflection of Jesus. Two different things. And when Jesus said, go and make disciples, he's not talking about sitting around a table with a bunch of Christ followers studying and memorizing the Bible. Again, I'm a Bible fan. When he said make disciples, you know what he's saying? Go to people who don't know Jesus. Love them until they make me the subject of their life, and then keep walking with them. That's what he meant by making disciples. That's when he said, a new command I give you. What? To love everyone as I have loved you, so you must love everyone. And his next thought after that was the why. Why is loving everyone like Jesus loves us so important? He tells us, so all people will know that you are my disciples, followers of Jesus, if you love them. We're not to picket people until they come to Jesus. We're not to shame people until they come to Jesus. We're not to guilt people into coming to know Jesus. We're to love them until they make Jesus the subject of their life. And Jesus says, hey, go. All authority has been given to me. Go. If you're a Jesus follower, go and make disciples. Find people that don't know Jesus and love them until they love Jesus. And he said, to all the nations. All the nations. It's everywhere you go. In the book of Acts, this is a story about the history of the church, the launch of the church. Jesus has a group of people together. They're up in this upper room. And who's there? The disciples were there. Mary, Jesus' mother, was there. Jesus' brothers that were skeptics. And now they're all in. are there, and other people were there. And you know what he does? Jesus defines all nations. He says, therefore go to Jerusalem. That's kind of their anchor city. To Judea, that was their state, their country, their region. To Samaria, that was a place that no one wanted to go to. And to the ends of the earth. And I think when Jesus said, and then he had to go to the ends of the earth, he had a smirk on his face. I mean, this is just in my mind, because when he said those words, they were all thinking that the ends of the earth was Spain. And I think when Jesus said, and go to Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria, the people you don't want to go to, and the ends of the earth, I think Jesus was smiling, because he was like, yeah, in 1800 and some years, there's going to be this city called Du Bois. And I think he thought to himself, they should name it something different. I'm joking. Right? I think when Jesus said, go to the ends of the earth, he was thinking about St. Mary's. Go to the ends of the earth, he was thinking about Punxsutawney. When he said, go to the ends of the earth, he was thinking about Grampian. When he said, go to the ends of the earth, he was thinking about Ridgeway. When he said, go to the ends of the earth, he was thinking about St. Mary's. When he said, go to the ends of the earth, he was thinking about Mill Hall. When he said, go to the ends of the earth, he was thinking about Clearfield. When he said, go to the ends of the earth, he was thinking about State College. When he said, go to the ends of the earth, he was like, no. This command to go, tell people about me, love them until they name me as a subject of their life, is everywhere you go, all nations. And then he gives two very specific actions that get tied into making disciples. This is not an exhaustive list, but these two, I think he highlighted to say, don't miss focus on these two. The first one was baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. We make baptism a huge deal at Tri-County Church. Why? Because Jesus made baptism a big deal. That's why we do it. And baptism is this powerful image of your old self going underneath water. And Paul goes, your old's underneath, and when you come out, you are a new creation. In part 2, last week, we talked about the old self coming off, the new self coming on. That's a powerful picture of baptism. The water doesn't do anything for you. The person baptizing doesn't do anything for you. It's not magic. It's the outward expression, the outward sign of Jesus changing you inside. And that's why we make baptism such a big deal, because Jesus said, oh, by the way, when you go and tell people about me that don't know me, that's making disciples, by the way. If that's not clear yet, I hope I get that clear. When you do that, guess what's going to happen? They're going to name me a subject of their life. And when they do that, you celebrate by baptizing them. And we have a baptism coming up in December. Go to tcconline.info. You can get all the information there. But we make such a big deal about it. Why? Because Jesus did. And then he said, teaching them to obey what? Everything. There's this Greek word again, all things. Right? Again, I'm a fan of teaching the Bible. But what did he say? Teaching them all things. What? I have commanded you. What was the new command that Jesus gave? To love everyone. To love first. Right? Church, if we get that one thing right, I'm just telling you, because some of you are like right now going, okay, Chris, I have named Jesus the subject of my life, but if I go talk to people who don't know Jesus, about Jesus, what if they ask me questions and I'm not an expert in the entire Bible? I don't know if I could answer all their questions here. I'm going to make it really easy. Spend the next year teaching them how to love like Jesus loved. And the second year, repeat. And the third year, repeat. If we as a church, a gathering people, just focus on that one thing, we're going to love everyone like Jesus loves us. If we just put that into action, I'm just telling you, it will change the framework of every community we're in. It is a game changer if we get that right. I challenge people all the time when they hit me with this, and this has happened for 25 plus years that I've been doing church leadership. Well, because I just want to go deeper. And I go, I just want you to love people. Whew. Let's take a deep breath together. But I'm serious. I'm all for the knowledge of the Bible, but Jesus didn't give his life for us to have more knowledge. He gave his life for us. to love everyone as he loves us. And when we love everyone as he loves us, then what happens? People will know that we are Jesus followers, and they will lean in. And when they lean into Jesus because they see Jesus' love coming through you, guess what they're going to want? Jesus. Church. It's a game changer. If we just did this. And then Jesus gives the last all. He gives, and surely I am with you always, or all the days, to the very end of the age. So Jesus promised that his presence is with us, Now, Matthew started this whole, one of the last teachings of Jesus, right? He set up the stage. 11 disciples were there. We think it was 11 plus probably some more people. It wasn't just 11 because the disciples had their disciples and there was other people always following Jesus. So it was this gathering of people. And right, when they saw him, right, when they saw Jesus, the resurrected Lord, they worshiped him. Why? Because, again, for all of us. Yeah. If we saw someone crucified and now they're alive, we would worship that. I mean, that's a thing. But, and again, I think for so many of you, this is going to be such an encouragement. Because Matthew, who remember was a tax collector, who was an outcast from his own town, who the religious people hated him, isolated him, rejected him, shoved him away because of his profession. Jesus walked up and said, hey, Matthew, come with me. Your life's going to change. And Matthew's sitting there. And I think as Matthew was recording this some years later, and he's thinking about this moment. And he's like, yeah, we saw Jesus and we were worshiping him. But then Matthew gives us such an important insight. You know what he tells us? But some doubted. Some hesitated. And for some of you, it's so easy to say, but yeah, Chris, if I saw Jesus alive, like if I was there, all my doubts would go away. And guess what? I have doubts. So I talk about this list of questions that one day I'm going to sit with God for eternity, asking him questions. I got uncertainties. I got questions. I got perspectives. I got all of that. I'm just saying, I'm glad that it's not about the quantity of faith that's required of us. Because Jesus said, you can have faith the size of a mustard seed, because it's not about quantity or how much faith you have. It's in the object of your faith. And when the object of your faith is a loving God. And Jesus knew this. And Jesus still, to this entire gathering of people, some that doubted, some that hesitated, some that had questions, some that were still scratching their heads, some that were seeing what they saw but still couldn't wrap their intellectual mind around it, people that were still conflicted, people that were still going, yeah, but Jesus still looked at the entire group of people and said, go, tell people about me. Love them until they name me as Lord and Savior. Baptize them. Teach them everything and start with this new commandment to love first. And so you can have doubts. You can have hesitations. And still tell people about Jesus. And you still can have doubts and you can still have hesitations and still love like Jesus loved. So, when we receive God who loves us first, and we name Jesus the subject of our life, we love people like he loves us. And when we love people like he loves us, we will live differently because now our life revolves around Jesus. And every time we try to shove me back into the picture, we pursue shoving ourselves out to keep Jesus as the subject. Perfection, no. Pursuit, absolutely. And when we realize we're to love first and live differently, these things intrinsically tied together, you know what happens? We take Jesus' words to therefore go, and we lead with all of our passion and purpose and our pursuit to make Jesus known. And so we lead like Jesus led. How? By leading passionately. Because Jesus looked at a group of people like you and me. He says, please go. Make disciples. Tell people who don't know about me. Love them to naming me as the subject of their life. Don't guilt them, don't shame them, don't beat them over the head with a book of rules of do's and don'ts. Love them. Serve them. Come beside them. And when that happens, baptize them. To celebrate what happened within. To celebrate that publicly. And then continue to teach them on what it means to live differently, what it means to live a life orbiting around Jesus. Jesus said 4 alls. And what's interesting about these 4 alls is the bookends, the first one and the last one. The first one was all about Jesus' authority, his power. The last one was his promise to be present all the days. And think about that. He starts and ends, the bookends, to say, hey, all power and my all presence is with you. And in the middle is what's on our shoulders. If Jesus is the subject of your life, you're to go to all people. Everywhere you go. Tell them about all things. And you start where? Loving like Jesus loved you. To love people first. Because people will know that you are a Jesus follower based on how you love everyone.